Good morning. Good morning. Okay, I just wanted to see if you were still awake. Okay, shh. Thank you. Thank you. My apologies for this late program. I overslept. But I'm here now. Anyway, we have a really exciting topic, and one that we began in Sydney, Australia, and people told me, you know, it's such an important subject that we can't possibly deal with it only one time. And this is the future of news in the internet age. And with me today are 4 top journalists who will share with you their opinions. And you say, well, why is that so important for businesswomen like us? Everything affects you. And the kinds of news that you get matters. And when you get it also matters. And so today with us, we have the indomitable Angela Mackay again from Financial Times. Yes. She's Managing Director of Financial Times for the Asia Pacific region, and she also serves on the executive committee of the entire group. And to my left is Alexandra Borchardi, and she has been to how many summits? 3? 4. Four summits. At that time, she was managing editor of Süddeutsche, which is, in many Germans' view, the best newspaper in Germany. But since that time, she has been at the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism, okay? Where she's been doing very important work with fellow journalists, training them, and also doing research. And then on my right is well-known Susanne Wille, a very respected news anchor with Swiss television SRF. And then to my extreme right is Ana Maria Montero, who guided us through the opening ceremony, and she is an anchor with CNN Money. So clearly a very, very seasoned, stellar group of people. What? She says you're calling us middle-aged. No. Seasoned, informed experience. So I want to begin, when you all began in the news industry, what did you think was the purpose of journalism? Quickly, Angela.
When I started in news journalism, there was no internet, so that is showing my age. Although I never worked on a typewriter, I went straight onto a computer. So I'm trying to give you a decade where you can pin my age. For me, when I started as a journalist, it was all about the excitement of discovery, of being able to tell a story to a broad audience, the slightly heady and exciting sense of power that comes from having your
really?
Words.
Power?
Yeah. Yeah. Because you have a lot of people reading what you say. But the other side of that coin is that you better be right, or else you're yesterday's news. Definitely. But for me, it was all about discovery, the excitement of learning a lot very quickly, becoming an expert in things almost overnight, and meeting the most incredible bunch of people, wonderful access. So that's all very hypnotic.
Alexandra, when you started?
Yeah, that was a long time ago, more than 25 years, really. Yeah, I always wanted to understand the world. I wanted to understand how the world works and how people work. And actually, I want to help people to understand how the world works. And it's not that everybody of you has access to everybody else. So you need quality information. That's always been my desire to come up with as much information as possible and think through things and then try to explain it and help people understand the world as it is. On that way, learning about the world myself. And that's always been my desire. And I've always been a journalist, very open. I did business journalism, I did political journalism, all kinds of stuff. And now I've been into the digital world in the past 10 years. And
We'll get into that.
Okay.
So you thought of journalism as a road to social good, and that you're the conduit to that.
I think that hasn't changed. I think journalism is a public good because it's important for informed citizens for all of you to make informed decisions about what's going on in your life. And since you're so busy in your jobs and raising your kids and whatever, you need someone who helps you understanding the world and making informed decisions as a citizen. And I think that hasn't changed in the past 25 years.
Okay, for you.
Well,
Susanne.
Switzerland is a very special country. We have a direct democracy, so people have to go and vote several times a year. For me, it was always important that I can contribute to good information, unbiased information, so citizens can build their own opinion. I think there's no strong country, no strong democracy without strong journalism. So that was my one motivation, but there was another one. I always felt that journalism is an incredibly powerful tool to give a voice to those who don't have a voice. So when I started as a reporter traveling across Russia, Iran, Brazil, Turkey, wherever I went, I portraited women, because we don't see enough women in media. And I told their story that would otherwise be silent. And these 2 points have ever stayed my motivation ever since. That hasn't changed.
Anna Maria, you sort of fell into the news.
I did. I did. Well, I only say that because I didn't want to be a journalist when I was growing up. I didn't really even know what that was. I knew that, you turn on the news in the evening and the news anchor was on and was telling you what had happened in the day. But I didn't really catch that bug until I was older at university. And one thing that really drew me in was the fact that I'm quite restless. And I get not bored easily, but I like to change. I always like to do something new. And journalism gave me that opportunity to always be onto a new story, a new beat, a new person, a new place. And that really suited me personally. But of course, the bigger picture is that I got a platform, as you were saying, to really be able to tell these stories. And it's quite addicting. I mean, it's a bit of a rush, our kind of work. And then television for me gave it that extra layer of excitement and that, wow, like you said, I'm out there with good and bad, because if you're wrong, although I will say I am very happy that I made most of my mistakes before the digital age, because nowadays our mistakes live forever. So it's quite good, but I know, I love my job.
Well, I'm delighted. I think all of you love your jobs. How do you define, well, let me put it this way. There's now a flood of information, through blogs, through social media. How do you filter all of that? How do you define good journalism? Because everybody seems to be a journalist nowadays, writing all kinds of opinions, and you have a public that thinks blogs are news. How do you decipher?
Well, looking at it from the lens of the Financial Times, we're primarily a business tool. We're not there to break the news like my colleagues in television, although we do like to break the odd story, and we're very proud of that. But for us, it's more about the analysis of global news, economic events, trends, very interested in analysing the data. The data often tells the real and romantic story, believe it or not. It does uncover things that have usually been very well buried. So for us, we come at it from quite a forensic point of view, and look at topics, I think, that are less sensational anyway. So from an FT point of view, I think people look at us as a trusted source. Now, on the other hand, what's to say that BuzzFeed or whoever is not going to come up with some fantastically crystalline analysis about economic developments? We would say that our audience can tell the difference, but at the same time, we realise that we need to come in very deep and very young to make sure we try to educate people who are millennials and younger that there are sources and there are sources. So now we're going into schools and trying to, a bit like crack cocaine, trying to get them very young, at 16, to get in that reading habit about the FT. And of course you can do it online very easily now, or they have to pay for it. So for us, we're trying to come in low, get people young, get them trained, get them to understand that there's a difference between a respected analysis and stuff that's just a very quick catch. So, but that of course does depend on people having judgment, and these days the whole judgment thing is what's up in the air.
Let me ask all of you, how many of you still read newspapers? Oh, nice, nice. You are not the norm. Would you agree with me?
Yeah, for me, the more important question is always who pays for quality journalism? Because, I mean, that's what makes the difference, and that's what pays all our salaries.
Yes. You two on TV, how do you filter through all of that stuff that goes through, you know, on the internet, you know, quickly, and the social media? How do you decide what's the real news?
Well, I don't find that part so hard because we have experienced journalism with a lot of knowledge. They have their own expertise. We talk a lot. We monitor the news. We have a strong fact-checking department. So nowadays, you do need this. In an age of fake news, you need to have people who can say if this picture is real or if that's misinformation or propaganda. So that has changed a lot. But choosing the right topic isn't the hardest thing. What I find is challenging is to stay a reliable source in a time of fragmented news consummation, when especially young people look at their mobile phones or they consume news via Twitter, Instagram. How can we still reach them? Because they are the future of a democracy and the future of a country. So we have invested a lot. We have implemented new processes, telling maybe a story that will be in my news program, 5 minutes piece. We tell it with a new storytelling approach on social media, so young people don't only consume headlines but get involved in really important topics. And I think that's the real challenge. And the second challenge is to become more transparent. I think it's not just the fragmentation that's a challenge, but you know, the mistrust in media that have been there for years. So how can we invest in that trust? And I'm a strong advocate of transparency. I believe it should become the new logics of media. We have to show people how we work, how we make decisions. You can do this with videos on social media, you can write about it, you can even talk about it in the program itself. Why did we do this piece? How did our investigative reporter do his job? What were the challenges? Why did we maybe leave out another topic? Because you want to know why we do certain things, and I think there we really have to improve altogether.
Ana Maria? There's lots of economic news, you know, what do you report and what don't you?
Well, I think, as Susanne pointed out, we also, fortunately, are backed by a solid group of journalists, and we trust in each other, and we debate, and we discuss, and we come to the conclusion of what we think is important to cover. Hopefully, we hit it every time. you know, you have no guarantees. Sometimes you're in a story that you think is great, but the audience doesn't react. And more, I think our challenge is to really coexist with the online platforms, because more and more these formats are changing, and how you tell the story becomes important. And how you engage an audience. Every social media feed has a different way of communicating. And so now, if I have a story about the Global Women's Summit, I have to think, well, on TV, it's going to look like this. In print, it's going to look like this. On Facebook, it will look like this. LinkedIn doesn't care what Facebook says, so, LinkedIn has to be... I mean, it's really, really becomes a lot more complicated and more complex. And so at the end, you have to cater if you want to engage. And more engagement is becoming, social media engagement, online engagement is becoming the way to measure who's looking, who's watching, who's reading.
There was an analysis by Harvard University of the news coverage of the last election. And they found that Donald Trump received the majority of coverage. And in the beginning, it was non-judgmental coverage. Whatever he said was written, was reported. And they found that Hillary received less news coverage, and what she got was predominantly negative, even from established newspapers and news outlets. There is a herd mentality. So to what extent do you feel, affected by the opinions of other journalists in your industry? Alexandra, you've been doing research.
It's definitely a rat race, and I think this is the time now that journalists have to ask themselves serious questions about mechanisms that actually drive reporting. And as you all already mentioned, I really believe that journalism needs to become much more of a conversation. Journalism used to be very much like some sort of top-down thing. Journalists felt, we are right and we're telling you what life is like, what the world is like. Journalism needs to be much more interactive, engaging, and a conversation with people. And actually, very often in this rat race kind of thing, when everybody tries to be the fastest and the quickest, journalists very often don't really listen to their audiences or to the people out there, but they look what others are doing. And I think we have to get beyond this, because very often journalists just do stuff to impress their colleagues, or they do stuff to impress their editor-in-chief or whoever is important to them and to their career. And I think it's really so important to go really out there and listen. And we actually just ran a study on diversity in journalism. It's going to be published next week, actually. And we found that the lack of diversity in newsrooms really affects the way things are reported, because there are so many segments of society that are just being ignored. Because, for example, lots of journalists, we lost touch with people in rural areas, because many journalists live in big cities, and they just sort of, they're influenced by what their peers are doing, but they don't really go out in the country, listen to people. So a lot of journalism actually has to change, and I think it's a challenge, but it's also a huge opportunity.
In the era of fake news, which is the term that was coined by, unfortunately, my president. No, he's not my president. He's the president of the United States. What do you think is the impact of that disparagement of people like you on your work? Anybody?
So we talk about trust again, right? If you got fake news, that can be of big damage to journalism and the media. So just imagine Swiss television as a public media company that has a high trust. If we continue making mistakes, or if we distribute fake pictures, fake news, that would be very damaging. So we're trying to prevent this by, as I said, analyzing. We have adapted our processes, analyzing a lot more than we did in earlier days. So invested in skills of journalists that have real skills, that have to educate themselves even more. So investing into education rather than, lingering on the surface of headlines. I think that is very, very important. And then media training for people, for citizens, that is important as well. I launched one new platform, we'll start in September, we'll invite our audience to our studios and talk to them about, media literacy, how they can observe what's going on in media. It's a vice versa thing as well. I share your opinion. We have to invest a lot in dialogue. I think fake news, I don't like the term actually, because I think if something is fake, it's not news, so I really don't like that term, but it's become mainstream, so I use it nevertheless. Apologies for that. I think we also have to talk to people that they learn to distinguish between real news and reliable sources and just a buzz of voices that are out there.
Angela?
The interesting thing is that a lot of the sources that disseminate fake news are feeling a backlash and feeling slightly guilty and deciding that they're going to invest in I suppose, traditional, reputable news media. Companies like Google have started dishing out cash to big titles like the FT, New York Times, etc., so that we can conduct research ourselves or develop new technology that's going to increase our engagement and our reach to our old audiences as well as new audiences. So the fact that there's a lot of social media platforms are giving traditional media, although we're all digital media now, but giving older titles cash to go and do some research is an acknowledgement by them that A, they've got probably too much influence on Joe blogs in the world, but also slight sign of their guilt that perhaps they've gone too far down one road. And also there are lots of new institutes that are being endowed by very wealthy people, not only wealthy people like Jeff Bezos buying newspapers and traditional titles like the Washington Post. You've got the Reuters Institute at Oxford. You've got a billionaire in Australia called Joe, what's her name?
Joe somebody.
No, I've forgotten her name. There's a lady Nielsen. Judith Nielsen has endowed an Institute for Journalism and Ideas in Australia with $100 million. So there's a lot of money being splashed out by a lot of wealthy people and also some very established new media companies to try and shore up, I think, the public trust in reputable media. So we're at a very interesting time now because there's a lot of investment, but there's still a lot of misinformation. And it's going to be a lot of fun over the next few years and probably quite scary to see how all that progresses.
But there is fake news. There was our Speaker of the House in the U.S. Congress, Nancy Pelosi. There was one made of her, and they slowed down her speech, so it seemed as if she was drunk. The Speaker of the House of Representatives of the United States Congress, and it went viral before somebody caught, oh no, this is fake. It was conveyed through, there's a secondary media in the U.S., I don't know about anywhere else. And I didn't know about it until after the U.S. elections. And they're very powerful, and they reach people. And those who can't stand, say, the Democrats and would believe that image of her slurring her speech and not knowing that it was slowed down so that it looked as if she was drunk. So those of you on TV, is there a greater possibility of that happening through visual media as opposed to print?
Well, we're all visual now.
Of course, with new technologies like deepfake, it's just really scary what can be done. We even experimented it, like putting my voice on the face of my colleague being an anchor to see if anyone noticed. I mean, we made it transparent, don't you worry. We said, we want to show you how manipulative this all can be. I don't think that we are more prone to manipulation like this. You can also distribute fake news through the newspapers. I mean, we're looking at these stories thinking we have to prevent like that the Swiss media landscape becomes like this. I think it's really, really damaging. But what can we do? We need to invest in journalism. We need to pay for quality journalists. So you have intelligent people questioning these things, doing investigative pieces on them, educating people. That is the only means, and that costs society a price, and we have to be ready to pay it.
I agree. It's quite, of course, it's detrimental. Of course, it makes me angry. I think it makes all of us angry that fake news exists and that it's out there. But maybe a bit to your point, if I can take the positive out of it, because I like to always look for the silver lining, is that it really makes us up our game, and we really have to focus on the facts and on doing our job the best as possible, because it's not going to go away overnight. It's really something that we have to, or ever, I don't know, something that we have to learn to navigate, something we have to learn to live with.
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I mean, there's two things to fake news. One of it is the President of the United States discrediting quality media, and that's a political thing, and that really hurts the profession. And for example, we did a study on who wants to be a journalist these days, and people are really discouraged. And think about France, where all the attacks on the journalists were with the Yellow Vest protests, because people feel like, oh, you're fake news. So this is one thing. The fake news problem, deep fake, whatever. Sometimes this impact is exaggerated, really. That's also what our research finds, because there's lots of reliable, really good news out there, and the proportion of fake news is really very small, and actually lots of people are capable of distinguishing fake and real. So we always say, don't ever underestimate your audience. I mean, this is a matter of media literacy, and in fact, young people are much better able to distinguish real from fake than older people who are not trained to that.
Okay, really? Where do you get that? Because young people don't read newspapers. They read it through their mobile phones in little bites. There's no analysis, usually, that they have time for. So how can they distinguish better than older people like us?
Well, young people do read news and on their phones, but very often they follow traditional media brands. And I mean, I know that I have two teenagers, and I mean, I know that young people, it's not only me, it's also research, that young people in school, they're trained in, how to tell apart what's real, what's fake, what's a reliable source, whereas older people, very often, they feel everything that's there, black on white, must be real. And conspiracy theories, for example. I mean, my mother-in-law is really, for example, very susceptible to these things. Like, she reads something on the internet and it's, this is someone said this is a terrible investment, or this is a great investment, and it was on the internet, Whereas, something like that would never happen to my kids. They say like, let me Google this. Oh, this is fake. This is a scam. So it's really, it very often comes down to media literacy. What my point was just, and this is really important, the fake news debate shouldn't distract journalists from producing real quality news, because if we just chase fake news, and if we're so worried about this could be fake and fact-checking, whatever, then we maybe forget about doing the real great stuff, investigations, really forward-looking stories, doing research on what really matters to people, going places where people haven't been to, like going to disadvantage, giving people a voice, all these things. This is so much more important than, letting ourselves distract from morning to night till chasing fake news that are definitely out there and that will be out there increasingly because of the technological possibilities. But really, producing quality journalism should be our major focus, and we shouldn't be distracted.
We're collecting a lot of data on that behalf, and what we're observing is that young people, they are ready to consume a video that can show, different opinions if it's cleverly done. So it's just a different storytelling. Maybe you and I, we're ready to, delve into a longer piece, but you can also convey the important messages in a different way. And we see that we reach young people. What worries me a little more, and that's maybe a call for action to all of you here in this room, the young generation and our children, they raise with social media, and the debate on social media is not always constructive, believe me, especially working in political journalism. This is no comfort zone. And my observation is the following, that the tone of voice can be really harsh, and there's not enough women out there participating in the discussion. And that's what our young people read. So go out there, raise your voice, get into the discussion, get involved, tell what you're thinking, participate, because otherwise we leave that really important space where opinions are being built to others.
Actually,
sorry.
just to, yeah. That is absolutely so true. At the FT, we're very old, we're 132 years old as a title, and we were, until about 10 years ago, we were certainly read by, vast majority of our readers were men. And then we started to do the analysis because data was born and it gave us the opportunity to look at that. And then we realised one of the reasons why I had so many men reading us in print and online was because men like to read what other men say about other men. So we just didn't have enough female voices or even images online or in print. And then we developed something called the Janet bot, named after Janet Yellen, the former head of the US Fed. And the Janet bot used to crawl all over the site and would tell us how many times we mentioned women's names in stories and how many images of women were on the site and how many female journalists were writing stories. And when we started doing this, the results were terrible, absolutely terrible. So we've changed that. And very slowly, we can see the improvement up from a low base, but we've managed to move our readership, our female readership, from 26%, I'm so embarrassed to say that, from 3 or 4 years ago, to about 34% now. So you're absolutely right about perceptions, and we're an example of a company that let it go too long before we realised our error. So we're trying.
Great. I do worry about the physical security of journalists. If you say often enough, you're fake news, there's a reporter named Jim Acosta, I think he's NBC News, and he went to a Trump rally, and then he was doing a stand-up, reporting. And there were people who kept yelling at him fake news, and they were trying to shake the platform that he was on because they felt he was fake news, that he was not reporting about the president well. And there is a large group of people like that in my country. So that, the four of you rely on a critical audience that may not necessarily be there. It also requires a certain level of literacy that may not always be there. So when I saw that, and then, of course, you have journalists in other countries like Russia who get killed, okay? And I do think we need you. I believe that. But if you say something often enough, you become it. If somebody, a president of a country, and other heads of state have now adopted that, if there is news that they don't agree with, they call it fake news. So that is dangerous, and that is what scares me about your profession. So how do you all feel about that?
I just had the International Congress of Independent Media in Geneva, in the building of the United Nations, where so many journalists came together and told their stories about being threatened, about not being able to do these professions. So there's international alliances being built to help each other. There was, for example, a very strong female journalist who is critical towards Duterte, in her country, and she was in prison several times. And
her.
Yeah, I know, you know her. And her bail was higher than of Imelda Marcos. I must tell you something. So that shows you where we are in certain countries. I believe speaking about these stories, making them public, if a journalist is threatened, journalism as a whole is being threatened. So we have to finish telling their stories, making them visible in our programs. I think that's what we owe them, and that's what we owe journalism as a whole. Never accepting that a journalist is being attacked just for asking critical questions.
Good point. Anybody else?
Well, yes, and obviously it's up to actually governments to make sure that journalists can operate safely and that freedom of speech is protected and all these things. But obviously you can't change your political leadership. I mean, this is only what the people can change, and this is everybody has to make up their minds when they're going to the voting booth and elect someone. Is this a person who's going to safeguard my democratic rights and freedom of speech and the rights of journalists to report? And I mean, yeah. So this is it's up to the people to elect political leaders who safeguard journalism instead of discrediting it.
We hope. We hope. Let me just do a round. What scares you about your field? Just quickly. What is the one thing that scares you?
Be scared first.
You go first, Anna Maria.
I think the thing that scares me the most at this point is getting it wrong.
Okay.
The point that scares me the most is the question, is society ready to protect the cultural good of journalism? Investing into the education of young people wanting to become journalists, paying for newspapers, or at least appreciating what journalism is doing. And then maybe that's not a fear, but a hope. We talked about the visibility of women in media, and talking about fake news is one thing, but accepting that so many women are not being portrayed in news, are not being present in newspaper stories, that is also some sort of fake news, and I hope that we will be able to change this, and that's maybe my second call for action. So if any of you is being asked for an interview, for an analysis by a journalist, do it. We need more women analyzing what's going on in the world. This is a powerful means of interpreting what's going on, so we all need you. Be ready, and when we come with questions, I'm so happy if you answer them.
Yeah, what scares me a lot is the erosion of business models. So there's not much advertising money any longer poured into media. Most of it is going to Google and Facebook. So there's actually areas, particularly in the United States, for example, huge areas that are not served by quality journalism any longer. No local journalism. The decline of local journalism is really it's really terrible, because there's lots of local governments out there where power is not held to account any longer because there's no journalism. So this is really scary, and Angela already mentioned that there's lots of philanthropists out there, and there's lots of people out there who feel we need to preserve quality journalism. I mean, not the least Jeff Bezos, who bought the Washington Post. So, if there's some investors in this room who feel they really want to have an impact and want to safeguard journalism, I mean, there's lots of news organizations desperate, or institutions, research institutions, whatever, training institutions for journalists that would really appreciate support, because the traditional ways of supporting media are eroding, and lots of areas are unserved by quality journalism already, and that's scary for society.
Yeah, and similar to Alexandra, running out of money is the thing that worries me. Not being able to have sufficient funds to be able to run a comprehensive and experienced newsroom. We have 600 journalists globally, and they're really expensive to maintain. And that's good because you want the best out in the field. But that business model takes a lot of levers to be pulled at all sorts of times to keep it running. We've had a subscription model right from the get-go, and we got criticised for that, but we're still there and we're able to fund our journalism. And that, to me, is the existential crisis in our industry.
I agree. We'll have time I'll give time, since I was late, for some questions. And anybody has questions, comments? Where are we? Okay. Claudia, you need to move the mic. Okay.
Thank you for a provocative and inspiring panel. The question is, I served on the board of directors of Chicago Public Media for 10 years, and our business model was challenged, and we discovered that podcasts played a significant role. Could you comment on the role of podcasts?
Oh, please.
Thank
Thank you for bringing it up. Podcasts.
Podcasts are fabulous because they help us, digital media like us, reach a millennial. So 59% now of our podcasts are listened to by people under 35. So that is a wonderful window for our content to reach a younger generation. Monetizing those podcasts is another thing, but we're starting to work on that, and I think that once we've worked out how we're going to make a lot of money out of them, it'll be even better for us. But they're a profoundly useful tool to reach a younger audience.
Any of you to comment on podcasts?
I fully agree. We just launched a total new audio strategy because we realized there's really going on something strong, and makes me very hopeful, actually, because you can convey so many important messages via podcasts. So we've invested a lot in podcasts. We launched a pitch for the best podcast. So that is, thank you for that great question.
Yeah, and much of journalism, and I think this is one of the major tasks in the years ahead, and the time ahead, is cutting through the noise, because in this age of over-information, overabundance of information, people want focus, and that's also what our research reveals about younger audiences. This is just journalism, there's just too much information out there, and very often they feel it's too negative. So podcasts are actually a good way to provide this focus and to help people understand the world as it is without being distracted all the time by all the other things that are popping up on screens. Maybe screens will be a thing of the past at some point, because people want so much more focus and time to concentrate.
Great. Next question.
Italy, today, we got an interior minister who's having women, and not only journalists, being attacked online. He's calling them, and he's opening a number of threats, being called sluts, being aggressed. Now, I expect women journalists to take a stand on this. And there are behaviors. The young captain who is being involved with the case of the Sea-Watch, the German lady, she's been released, and she is suing the Minister of Interior of Italy for having her exposed in that way. This is bordering with illegal behaviors. Please do something.
I fully agree, and I think at that point we have to say, when I said before that, go out there, raise your voices on social media, it's also to defend your women colleagues, because I always say that the internet and social media is not a space above the law. So if a woman is threatened, is being offended, we have to fight it. Even when someone's attacking me on social media and it goes below a certain line, I talk to our internal law department, because we cannot accept that physical abuse is being transported onto social media. But that we have to tackle all together.
Next.
Hello, Isabelle Valentin. I belong to Femmes Ingénieurs, our French association regarding tech and women. I would like to take the opportunity of such a panel to ask you, how do you believe we can increase the visibility in the media of such an event or any event which is positive for women?
Anybody?
Increase the visibility of in the media, in all the media, of such an event like the Global Summit for Women? How do you think we can do that?
Well, actually, we'll probably just use some of the tools that we were worried about just then. So more use of Twitter, LinkedIn, stories, Facebook. I think that the social media tools are great when you use them for reputable reasons. They are tools for good as well as tools for evil. So there's plenty of ways to get this message out there. You know, even little short video snaps can be uploaded on your Facebook page or through LinkedIn or Twitter. So there's lots of different ways that we can utilize the powerful technology to promote this kind of event. And of course, Irene does it so well.
One tries.
Yeah, and there's one more thing. Don't share stuff that's sort of, all that negative and vile stuff because just you find it so outrageous. Just don't resist the temptation to share stuff with your friends like, oh, you know, look, here someone said something really outrageous, because it just will amplify it even more. Just don't share stuff that's negative just because you think
Like
it might be
what?
outrageous
Like what?
or funny. Like, oh, something like maybe Trump tweets something and then you share it with your friends and you say, look what he tweeted again, isn't that outrageous? That just helps to amplify the message. Just don't do it. I mean, that's really, just try to keep it down, because this is going to make it louder and even more important. And that's exactly the effect you talked about earlier, about, you know, people feel like, oh, you know, Trump as a candidate, oh, isn't he outrageous? Isn't he whatever? And that's why everybody put his picture and everybody shared his stuff, and that made him so big. So if you just sometimes resist the temptation, but just try to ignore things, that would help it a lot. Amplify the good stuff and the positive stuff.
Was the question how to increase the visibility of women? So there's two ways. The equation is really simple. We need more women journalists, also in the tough departments like finance and politics that have an awareness to these topics. We need women being ready to expose themselves. It can be painful, but you can do it. It can also be a big chance. And then also the tools of self-empowerment, like you said, with social media. Look at Ursula von der Leyen, who's been nominated to become the president of the EU Commission. Yesterday, I read the headline. She is small, she is petite, and she has a heavy weight carrying with her. And things like this we no longer want to read. So you can react to this, or look at what she's done. She's opened her own Twitter account, so she can be her own chef in what she wants to deliver and what message she wants to come across. And that you can do this as well.
Last question.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Yudalmis Bader Smith Reyes. I'm Cuban. I'm graduated in business, and then I came to Switzerland to make a master here in politics, economics, and religion. And I'm very interested about this argument on media, on fake news, and how is the impact that this has on political discourse. Because as we know, this may have a negative impact on societies, not only because affect the way that people interpret what the politicals, what they said, and how they manage conflicts. So I think that in the production of information, it's a long process. It's not something that is coming just like this. So what I think is, how is possible to include a kind of crypto or a kind of certificate or something that the people know exactly how the information is authentic? I don't know if you understand my question. I will try to explain myself better, because I think that it's very important, all what we are living right now, about the technology with blockchain, with the different crypto. For example, Facebook is also developing a new a new coin. I think that this maybe could be a positive development in future for the information. How do you think that this crypto revolution that is happening right now will be affecting the way that we interpret the information that we receive? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's an interesting idea, to use the technology around cryptocurrencies, take it beyond finance into the currency of information. So yeah, that is something that we're looking at, and also our parent company, the Nikkei, which is the biggest media group in Japan, is looking at too. So you should be a journalist, because that's a very live issue that a lot of international media companies are looking at. I don't have the answer yet, but we're working on it.
I'm sorry, for those of you in line. Okay, Narelle, just quickie.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you so much for really thoughtful observations. A practical question. You've invited us to use the media more. Would really value your tips for women trying to influence. How do you engage with media? What are your tips?
I don't know if I understood acoustically the question. Or,
Can you repeat that, Narelle?
If you'd like us to engage more with the media, what advice do you have for us in engaging with journalists and building a relationship over time?
My tip number one is relax. Just try it out. Try to find your voice. I mean, you're all intelligent, obviously successful women with a backbone. And I think the backbone is very much underestimated physical attribute. So you all have a backbone. And with that, you can survive in social media. You know, just think before you write something. That is very important as well. But be bold and find out how they react to something you're saying. Train yourself in being a personality on social media. Maybe you make a mistake. Well, that's not the end of the world. But at the end, you will have a strong voice out there and you can have an impact.
Yeah, and just don't say no if you're asked for a comment. I mean, this is really the time for women to be present on media. All kinds of organizations are, for example, accumulating data about data sources about who are female experts on certain subjects. The BBC was just incredibly successful with the 50-50 project. They had their goal was to actually raise the sources that are quoted, male, female, to 50%. The FT is part of this. So actually there's so many journalists out there looking for qualified, interesting women to comment on things. And the experience very often is that women say, oh, you know, I'm not really good enough, I don't have time. So please, if you are asked by media to comment on something, you know, raise your hand, raise your voice, be active, and say yes, you know. And you know, the guys are not always doing it better. They just sort of, you know, try to wing it better, maybe. So don't worry about it. And it's going to be, you know, you say something, and it's very often it's next day it's forgotten anyway. So you just go ahead, be bold, make your statement.
Also, you know, you guys, you should be on Twitter, Facebook, etc. Somebody was saying, you got 1,000 women here, they should be in social media and we should be trending right now, and you are not. So GSW 2019, hashtag.
Also, just to finish up, I mean, it really is quite easy to engage with us these days, because I think everybody here has a Twitter handle. Everybody here has numerous, I'm sure, social media accounts. So it really is as easy as looking us up on LinkedIn and connecting and engaging in conversation with us. I mean, I think that's something that this is a bit of a gift of our digital age, is that you can actually reach us quite easily. So if you have something that you want to say, or you have something that's concerning, or something that you really want to communicate, I mean, we're here.
And if I can give a tiny bit of practical advice, when someone wants to interview you, just think about the initial comment you want to make. Keep it really short and keep it really snappy, and just hook them in with an initial brief hopefully clever play on words sort of comment. It's a great way to start, and then people will ask you more questions after that. But don't overthink it to start off with. Try to be focused with a short, snappy comment.
And we could also start today with some kind of guerrilla plan, so we just all start to follow each other, starting now, posting something with GSW 2019, and look at the power that we will have together.
Please give a big hand for this terrific group of journalists. Thank you, Ana Maria, Susanne. Thank you, Alex Borchardi. Thank you, Angela Mackay. Keep being terrific. Thank you very much. We'll move on now to our next panel. So if our CEOs would please come up, I would appreciate it. You're welcome. You're welcome.